All right, you see these guys? That is St. Louis today. Do they look a lot like these guys? That's the Occupy movement back in 2011. So as these protests continue to grow, exactly who's protesting? And are they really protesting about just Michael Brown? Or more about just bashing capitalism? Or something else? Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto. And you see this guy? Well, he's accused of throwing fake blood on New York City Police Commissioner Bill Bratton at a protest in Times Square. Turns out he's also a key figure in the Occupy Wall Street movement, adding calls for Black Friday boycotts to protest the Brown decision. And Niger Innes is beginning to wonder if this is about something more than Michael Brown. Niger, good to have you back. What do you make of all this?
Well, I'm terribly frustrated. You know, I said to you the other night, Neil, what happens when the circus, and I define the circus as the paid protesters, the anarchists, the activists, the card-carrying zealots that are out there, the Occupy Wall Street crowd that has come into Ferguson. What happens when they leave town after all the burnings, after all the, God forbid there should be any deaths, is what will be left is an economic wasteland. And the very frustration, legitimate frustration, that the people of Ferguson have, the young people of Ferguson have, jobs, economic opportunity, education choices, and education and economic uplift, their situation is going to be worse off, not better off because of this.
You know, though, obviously there were agitators. You and I were talking the night of the protests that there were a lot of outside groups. In fact, we've got confirmation of that many had checked themselves into local hotels days, some of them weeks ahead of the fact. To what end? What do you think's going on?
Well, I think largely, you know, and I don't want to get too conspiratorial here, but I do believe that there are elements within the progressive movement that saw the results of 2014 election and saw the decreased turnout in Latino community, saw the lack of enthusiasm in some black communities, the fact that you had some actually Republicans like John Kasich get 25% of the black vote, in Georgia 10% of the black vote with Republican. And these progressive elements said, we've got to do something to inspire and to revive the kind of galvanized support that we've had from these groups before. Young people have dropped off tremendously, by the way, from this progressive coalition.
All right, so but think of what you're saying, Naja, then it isn't strictly along racial lines or even for racial issues. Doing it for what reason, then?
They're doing it to galvanize. I ultimately believe that they're doing this. This is ultimately a GOT effort for 2014 to get folk, 2016, to get folk that have been dropping off from that progressive coalition, blacks, Latinos. And by the way, this is not just a Michael Brown issue. This was the executive amnesty issue that came within days, by the way, of the verdict. That's not an accident.
Right.
That President Obama did that. He and progressive elements are trying to re-engage all of those within the progressive coalition that have been dropping off or, God forbid, voting Republican, to get them reignited for 2016. And, Neil, the real tragedy in all this, of course, is that the people, the legitimate people in Ferguson, you know, we have a campaign called Restore the Dream 2015, led by myself, Dr. Alveda King, Bishop Harry Jackson, a number of leaders, minority leaders are coming together to deal with real problems confronting the minority community. Problem of economic opportunity and economic empowerment. Problem of lack of education choices. You know, rebuilding the family. These are real issues and real concerns. And if people get caught up in police-community relations while not really realizing that the tragedy of Michael Brown, and I feel so bad. I lost two brothers, okay, who were killed. Chaos. I feel very, very sad about what happened to Michael Brown. But the root of Michael Brown's tragedy is when he went into that convenience store bullied that store owner, and stole those cigarillos. That is when the clock started ticking on this young man's death. And if we do not boldly and dramatically confront the crisis among young black men and young men in general, we're not going to get anywhere.
But even to your point, Niger, most young black men don't do this sort of thing and don't respond this sort of way. But I believe many are agitated when, of all people, a Reverend Al Sharpton comes down there to protest the decision and to all but galvanize them to do just what they did.
It is not just, yes, you're absolutely right about Reverend Al and Jesse Jackson and the new so-called New Black Panther Party and all these folk that don't give a darn about Michael Brown. They don't give a darn about young black men. They have a completely different agenda, and that agenda is to make themselves relevant. You know, these elements and these groups and their big government liberal democratic allies have had control in these communities in urban centers for 50 years, and they have not delivered for these folk. For our people, they have not delivered. They are losing relevance. You know, one of the most fascinating things we found out, Alveda King and myself found out in Ferguson, is the total disconnect between young blacks in Ferguson and the Democratic leadership in Ferguson and in the state of Missouri, which many of it is, much of that leadership is black as well. And so these politicians have tried. They've tried their big government liberal solutions. They have failed. They're out of touch, and they are desperate to regain relevance by whatever means necessary. And that includes President Obama and his Attorney General.
It's always good having you, Niger, for no other reason than just another perspective, a very smart perspective at that. Thank you, my friend. Niger
Thank you,
Ennis.
Neil.